Hello everybody and welcome back to Unlocking Unreal Engine.
I wanna be the best in the game, invest in my name. Check no restraints, I'm obsessed with the pain. I ingest, I retain, assess and I change.
Sorry this one took a little extra long to get out. It's not a super complicated episode. Unfortunately, over the last week we did lose my grandmother and a handful of other things. If you've been following my channel long enough, you know life just will not stop for me. But this isn't a YouTuber apology video, so let's get started. Today, I wanted to talk about event dispatchers. They're a little bit different than the blueprint interfaces that you're used to. Remember, blueprint interfaces are little envelopes. We're going to send a message to a blueprint. Then that blueprint has its own definition on what to do when it receives that message. However, that's not always going to work, especially if we're dealing with a dynamic system where we might not know the exact thing we need to send it to, in which case we either have to come up with a convoluted system to know what object needs the message, or we can look at things called event dispatchers. We're going to do this by using a light switch and lights, so that way you can see that depending on what we want a light switch to control, we can use event dispatchers to make it happen. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control Space to open up the content drawer. We're going to go into my branded BP folder. We're going to go into the actors. I'm going to right click. We are going to go to the blueprint class. I'm going to select actor. Remember, that is because it takes place in 3D space. I am going to do a BP underscore light switch like that. We'll do a Control Shift S to save all, and we will open up the blueprint. Now, I currently don't have a light switch, so I'm going to be using a random static mesh. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a static mesh to our components, and I'm going to name this SM light switch as if I have one. With it selected on the right-hand side in the details, you'll see that we can choose a static mesh. I'm going to choose the chair because it works. Also, this error that you get whenever you add the chair is actually intentional. It's to teach you about nanite. We're not worried about it though. We're just going to go ahead and ignore it. We will deal with that some other time if we ever get to that. But okay, we have a blueprint and we have a chair in it. Let's Control Shift S to save it and compile. And we're going to need to be able to interact with this. Do you remember how to add the interface? I'm going to take a brief pause. Do you remember how to add the interface? Time's up. What you want to do is you want to go to class settings on the right hand side. We have implemented interfaces. We are going to add, if you remember, we did BPI for blueprint interface underscore interaction. And with that on, we will again Control Shift S and compile. Okay, so now we have a blueprint that has a visual representation, and because we added the interface, it can now accept an interaction request that we can then define. This is going to be a light switch, so I think what we should do is start by adding a variable. We're going to add a Boolean, something we talked a lot about last episode, and I'm just going to name this on with a question mark. And you'll see that it is just a Boolean, compile and save. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click, we're going to create a custom event, and I'm just going to call this toggle switch. I'm not even going to say toggle light because technically what we're making right now doesn't have to be a light switch because we're using event dispatchers. Now, right now, you don't know what that means, but you will soon. So I'm actually going to potentially even rename this from BP light switch to just BP switch because you could easily use this for anything. But for now, I will keep it light switch. So whenever we interact with it, what are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to toggle the switch. But what does it mean to toggle the switch? Well, let's get a reference to our on Boolean. We'll hit B and click to get a branch. We'll plug in on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click that branch and I'm going to type in is the switch on, just so we have a quick glance and we can read the comment, see what it says. And then we'll need more custom events. So we're going to create another custom event and we're going to say turn on. And then I'm going to create another custom event. And I'm going to say turn off. So whenever we go to toggle the switch, if on is true, then we need to turn it off. So turn off. If on is false, then we need to turn it on. Turn on. And we'll hit compile and save. So just so we have a visual representation on whether or not it is on or off, what I'll do is I'm going to go to the viewport and I'm going to take my static mesh. I'm going to make this chair upside down. So we're going to put it at -180 on the rotation, or actually I hate when it does this. So whenever it does this, if you look, it's 180 on the X and 180 on the Z. This is nonsense. We're going to clear that really quick. And I'm just going to go to the Y and type in 180, and you get the same result. It's not necessarily a problem if it does 180, 180. The issue just comes down to if it is doing that and you have logic that requires you to use precise rotations and things, that's going to mess it up because it's going to try to undo the X and then undo the Z and then try to put the Y back where it's supposed to go. It's nonsense. I don't know why it does it. Just keep your eye open for it. However, because we went ahead and flipped it, you'll see that now it is underneath the ground. So I'm going to lift it. And if you look, you see this grid here? This is actually a representation of the ground. So what I'm going to do is just make sure that it's roughly sitting on the ground like that. And that'll be its default position. So we'll hit compile and save. So this is what it's going to look like when it's off. And then what we're going to do is when we turn it on, we're going to get a reference to the light switch, or the chair in this case. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the relative location and rotation. We want both in this case. We're going to go ahead and plug that in, and I'm going to need some space. So let's move this down and keep this like this. The new location, well, we know by default it's sitting at 0. And we know that by default the rotation is also 0. So this is a very easy one to set up. We'll hit compile and save. And then we'll take that same reference of the light switch. I'm just going to copy paste it. You could drag if you'd like. And we are going to set the relative location and rotation to what it is now. Because remember, we went ahead and made the default off. So this is the default. And we're sitting at 105 on the Z. So we'll go to the event graph. Location, we want 105 on the Z. And on the rotation on the Y, we're sitting at 180. So that will set the relative location depending on if it turns it off or on. We'll hit compile and save. However, we're not updating the Boolean. So let's go ahead and pull the Boolean out and do a set really quick. So if we turn it on, we need to set that to on. If we turn it off, we need to set this to off. Now, because of the previous episodes, you might be wondering why I'm setting the location and rotation instead of doing a move component to. I don't want it to sweep. I just want it to be instant, because with most switches, unless you're using a big lever, you're not going to see it move anyway. Like a light switch is going to go, right? So I'm not really worried about it actually having a sweeping motion. So instead, we're just going to set it instead of like moving the component. However, let's just go do a quick test. We're going to go ahead and drop our light switch into the world. I'm going to hit play, and let's go see if it switches on and off. So if I hit F, it's on, hit F, it's off, and now you can see that it's turning on and off. However, now we get into the steak and potatoes of the episode. We're going to start talking about what event dispatchers are and why they're so powerful. So right now we have a very simple system. We interact with it and we toggle the switch. Very simple. However, in the bottom left of any blueprint, you'll notice that we see event dispatchers. If I add one, the naming convention for these is going to be on whatever happened. So in this case, on switch on. Now I know that sounds really silly, but what happened is we turned the switch on. And then I'll add one more. On switch off, which doesn't sound as silly. Control Shift S and compile. Now what we're going to do is whenever you have an event dispatcher, you need something that dispatches it. Something that says, hey, I'm the thing that lets you know when to react. If that doesn't make sense right now, don't worry, it will soon. So when we turn the switch on, if we click the on switch on and drag it out, you'll see we can do some stuff. We can call, bind, all that kind of stuff. What we're going to do right now, we're going to call it, okay? So now, because it's an event dispatcher, whenever we turn the switch on, it's going to call switch on. It is dispatching the event. It is saying, hey, the event of switch on just happened, okay? And now we'll do the same for the switch off. So we'll pull it out and we'll hit call. And now we have two events that get dispatched whenever we turn the light on or off. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do something pretty crazy. We're going to control lights that aren't even in our blueprint. We're going to control whatever we want because now we can bind things to those event dispatchers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over to my lights over here. I'm going to grab the directional light. It's the one that kind of looks like a sun. And I'm going to bring this down to like 0.5 so it's nice and dark. Then up here under the first person map tab, you'll see I've got a quickly add to project button. If I click on this, I can go down to lights. And I'm just going to add, for now, we'll just add one. I'm just going to add one point light. So as you can see, this is a random point light and it has absolutely nothing to do with our switch here, our blueprint. So how do we go about getting this switch to turn that light on and off? Well, the first thing I want to do, by the way, is you see how our switch is off? That means our light also needs to be off if this is going to work correctly. So I'm going to click on the light. On the right-hand side under the details, under search, I'm just going to type in visible, and I'm going to uncheck the visible. So that way that light is off. Which, by the way, next episode, I'll show you some advanced techniques so that you can keep all your lights on, even if you want them off. So that way, whenever you go to edit your map, you can leave all the lights on so you can see what you're actually doing. But we'll save that for now. Back to on point. How do we get this event dispatcher, this switch, to affect this light? Well, if I open up something called the level blueprint, let's start with what is the level blueprint. The level blueprint is something that exists to control the level that you're in. You don't need it for everything because you can control level flow like locked doors, whether or not a person can pass a certain NPC. You can control that level flow within blueprints, okay? However, there are certain things that the level blueprint helps with a ton. And in this case, with our light switch, it's going to help us a ton. And in order to get to that level blueprint, what we need to do is, you see this grid looking thing? We need to click it, and you can see that we can open the level blueprint. Now remember, these are level specific. You can even see that it's named first person map because this area is the first person map. And it's empty, there's nothing here. However, you can add variables that are level specific. You can create events that are level specific, but let's use it for what I need to use it for, event dispatchers. So one of the cool things about the level blueprint is we can actually reference things inside the level. You know how like on our light switch, we can reference our components? Imagine everything in your level is a component and you can just reference it. It's quite powerful. In order to do this, you need to have it selected. So I'm going to click on my switch. I'm going to go to the level blueprint. And now if I right click, you'll see that I can create a reference to that light switch. Now it's named BP light switch, but it's not referencing the blueprint. It is indeed referencing this specific object reference. See, from persistent level, it is referencing specifically this right here. And now we're going to do something pretty cool. In the light switch, remember we created two event dispatchers, on switch off, and we've called both of them. In our level blueprint, if I pull out of our reference to the switch, I can now do this. Remember how one of them was called bind? We had call, bind, and a couple other things. If I type in bind event to on switch on or off, which remember we created these two. There's a couple there by default. I don't know if you noticed if I back out here. There's some other stuff, but don't worry about those. Those are just like engine specific. But if we look at the ones we created, we have bind event to on switch off and on. You'll note that we get this neat little box here. And then weirdly, we have an event that we can pull out, which is pretty unique to this. So don't worry too much about what's happening here. We're going to do this in a weird order, but trust me, it's for clarity's sake. So we're going to bind an event to whenever this gets called. So we're going to take an event and we're going to pull out, and we're just going to hit a type in custom event because it is going to be something we're creating right now. And we're just going to say turn off lights, and I'm going to say 1. Or no, oops, this is turn on lights and then 1. And the reason it's 1 is because you might have multiple switches. So we're going to turn on lights 1. Another way you could do that, by the way, is name it based on location if you know your map really well. And let's go get a reference to at least one of the lights that we need. So this one. We're going to go to our first person map blueprint, right click and create a reference. Okay, so this drives me insane. If you look, whenever I move my mouse right now, you see how it's always doing the event. I think this is a bug in Unreal Engine 5, and it drives me insane. Anytime this happens, you just need to figure out what it is you were hovering whenever it popped up. So in this case, I'm pretty sure it's this. So if I hover it again and then go off of it, it should... Oh no. Oh, I figured it out. It was this right here. I hovered this and it made it go away. If that ever happens, you're just trying to figure out what you were hovering whenever it popped up to make it go away. Sorry, slightly off topic, but we're binding an event to turn on lights 1. So we're going to take that point light and we're going to set the visibility. So set the visibility. Now, if you notice, we have a light component and a point light component. I'm almost positive in this case, we need the light component. As you can tell, I don't remember off the top of my head because it's weird that they're both there. I'll be honest, I don't know the difference. I don't know why there's 2, but there is. But anyway, we're turning the lights on, so we want the new visibility to be true. Okay, let's go back up to here really quick, because obviously this is never going to get ran. There's no execution pin. So this is one of those cases where we might use begin play. So if we hit P on the keyboard and click, or you can right click and just type it in, you'll get event begin play. Event begin play takes place on the first frame of the game. So when you hit play, the very first frame that happens is begin play. So what we want to do is create a custom event. And I always just call this, like, I separate these in case I want them to be like a specific load order, which I know right now probably sounds too complex. Don't worry, it's just saying in what order do things need to load so my logic works correctly. Don't worry right now. I'm just going to call this bind lights, okay? So this is just an event that binds the lights. And we will put that on the begin play, bind lights. So what's going to happen is on the first frame, it's going to run bind lights. Bind lights is now going to bind an event to on switch on, which of course is coming from this specific light switch. And the event we bound to it by this red line here is turn on lights 1, which gets the point light, gets the light component, and sets the visibility to true. So now if we compile and save, the lights will now know to watch for when that switch changes. So I'm going to hit play. And we're going to go over here and we're going to turn this on. And notice the light turns on. Now we haven't bound the lights off yet. So let's go do that. We're going to go back to the level blueprint. We're going to pull out of BP light switch again, or you can create another reference to the same thing. It doesn't matter. And we're going to bind event to on switch. Now we're going to do it for off like this. And I will say it becomes a little bit of an art to continue to make this look well whenever you've got so many tangling lines and stuff. But you'll get used to it, and I highly recommend getting used to it now and not later. So now we're binding the switch to on to this light. However, let's pull this out a little bit. And now we're going to pull out, and we are going to bind it to another custom event. And this one will just be turn off lights 1, right? It's the same set of lights because it's the same switch. I'm going to take this pin, move it over just so it looks a little bit better. And we already know what we need, so we're just going to grab these 3 here. We're going to copy, we're going to paste, drag this over like that, move these into a better position so it's a little bit tighter. New visibility, however, needs to be false, not true. And now I will compile and save. So whenever we get the first frame, event begin play, we bind our lights. We're saying whenever this gets called, turn the lights on. When this gets called, turn them off. So now we have 2 blueprints that are interacting with each other, and they're in no way, shape, or form connected outside of the event dispatcher. And remember, this light here isn't even a blueprint. It's just a random component we dragged into the map. This is why event dispatchers and the level blueprint are so powerful. Now, let's go ahead and take a look. What if we want this to be like multiple lights? Let's drag one over here and drag one over here. It's actually super simple. If we go to this one, like this is a new one, we go to the first person map. If we right click, we can create another reference. We can get its light component. So get light component like that. No, not color, just the component, And I'm not mistaken, this can have multiple targets. Yeah, so because this can have multiple targets, now we're controlling both lights on the on. Let's go ahead and go back to our map. Grab this one. Do the same thing, create a reference. Get the light component, preferably not the light color. Plug it in. And now we're going to control all 3 lights on specifically the on. I didn't plug in the off yet. And boom. Now we've got all 3 lights turning on, and just like that. Now, the reason this is important, because a lot of you might be thinking, okay, well, why wouldn't you just have like a blueprint with multiple lights on it? So that way it's all connected and you don't have to deal with this. Well, if you create a single light switch and it uses event dispatchers, it doesn't matter what environment you're dealing with. Or even potentially what door you're dealing with. We could literally, you know what, let's just do it. We can grab this door. We can go to the first person map. We can get a reference. We can just pull out and type in toggle door like that. And then after it turns the lights on, we'll just have it go down here to toggle door. And now not only is it controlling the lights, it is now controlling the door. So if we just go over here, boop, now the door opens as well. So the reason it's important is because it's modular. If you have a bunch of detail lighting and things, you know, your artist goes in there and starts putting lights everywhere or doors everywhere, or you just need like a switch system for your game, this makes it so it's not hard coded. This makes it so if you need it to change depending on the situation, it's capable of doing that. It saves you time, it saves you system memory. There's a lot of benefits to using event dispatchers and keeping things modular. Anyways, you guys have been great. Remember, I do have a Patreon down below if you'd like to support me and you enjoy my content, and I'd love to bring you even more content. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.